Okay, so yes, in week 5, this text, let me shut this window over here. So it's the 30 things down. It was a mini lesson on speculative fiction. So in here is this. So it was the presentation on, well, just some background information about speculative fiction as a super category. So that was the presentation. But if I like words, so I always like to try to figure out what something is just by breaking down the word. We did the same thing with, I did the same thing with the word forward. Like, what does that mean? So even just thinking about the the term itself, where does it come from? What's the history? Does that term actually still fit, or have we changed it somehow? So the root of speculative just means to observe, to see something. So the pursuit of truth by observing and looking, and hopefully this may start to make some sense when we look at the definitions. So it's speculative fiction. It actually started out as a subgenre of science fiction. So science fiction was the over category, and then underneath it were different types. And so the original development of speculative fiction, actually, it tried to be a substitute for fiction, for science fiction, and then was a subgenre. So, and the main thing is that what makes it different from science fiction is that it focuses on human beings, like how we interact maybe with technology. So the focus isn't on technology. So in speculative fiction, the science part is not going to be explained. Hence, Dana can just poof back and forth all the time, and you don't have to explain the mechanisms of back and forth to the future, because it's focusing more on people than it is the technology. And then it became a genre that is the opposite of science fiction. And so it's focused on possible futures. So over time, that aspect of it changed. And then now here we are, and it's basically a super category, like speculative fiction now houses science fiction. Because it's designed to help us think about what is reality? What are our everyday experiences? What happens if we ask and explore narratives, stories around what ifs kinds of questions? So, what if I went back in time? And what if I went to the future? So, all kinds of what if questions. And so, in that respect, of course, we are going to focus on the last definition, which is the most complex. And so, I'm not going to spend a bunch of time on going over, but you can see where this presentation is. And so my question this week came from, if the features and characteristics of speculative fiction so these are the 5 like things to consider. One is most of the stories go beyond just what are the characters doing or what are the plots. They look at what are the laws of the world that story is set in, whether those laws are explicit, like directly stated, or they're implied. So how are the laws of that world different from ours? And because the character could be exactly the same, like Dana and her husband, they are who they are, but when they live in a world with the laws that are opposite or different from theirs, something happens beyond just those characters. Like if I am morally, if I have, moral values in the 20th century, can I actually still have those in the 1800s? So that's the first thing, is that you're going to look at more than just like the elements, which is what Foster gave us, like these different kinds of elements of fiction. But what speculative fiction does is it plays with those elements a lot more. Like the hero's journey isn't the hero who we expect the hero to be, or maybe that hero turns out to be a whole bunch of different people. So it messes with how we expect the literature to perform, if that makes sense. And then the other point is that it's going to deal with serious subject matter. Like, it really does not want us to be comfortable at all. Speculative fiction changed a lot in the 1960s and 70s, as well did our world. Science fiction used to be very narrow for who could participate in it, but speculative fiction is open up to actually have us question our social structure. And you have a lot more diverse voices in it who are writing. And that's one of the reasons I picked Octavia Butler, because as a woman of color, as a Black American, there just aren't many women. When she was writing, she's like one of the very first women to break into science fiction. And because her work wasn't very technical or science, they had to call it something else. So hence this idea of science fiction or speculative fiction can encompass what science fiction, what we used to expect, if that makes any sense. The third point is that speculative fiction, like it usually does deal with complex issues. If you recall your reading of Kindred, even the word kindred, like what does that mean? How does it work? What are family social relationships about? So it's a lot of questioning. And then they usually present more than one story. And there might be an obvious, or what you call a major narrative, and then a minor narrative. And both those stories are equally important to figuring out what the text is trying to get us to think about or consider in our real world. So if a character looks like to be the main character, then maybe just as important minor stories going on. And to understand anything, you've got to kind of accept the co-star's role, so to speak, as well as the main character. And then the fifth point is the timeline is rarely the present. It's usually the future, the past, or some alternative time, parallel time. And this is me now, and I think that's presented to actually get people to think about their present differently, to get at those what ifs. And so this is kind of like where we are now in with Butler and ending up with popular fiction. And when we look at speculative fiction, it's the biggest circle. Like everything else fits. The only thing that's not like in here directly is suspense and mystery or crime detective story. But I think they can be, because one of the main purposes of, I guess, developments of speculative fiction is that it takes all these subgenres, all these genres, and that's why it's challenging. And a writer can just put them together. They're not so separate anymore. And then this was a 4-minute video just about trying to wrap your head around what speculative fiction is. And then the other main point is speculative fiction encompasses all kinds of mediums. So media. So it's not just the book, like it will be film, it could be plays, it comes in different medium formats. And so that's the other thing, that everything else we looked at now is pretty much defined by the written, but speculative fiction can come across in different mediums. And that is why I had you reread the section I assigned to review the section on Glover and McCracken, I messed up this man's name, because that section was about other media that we can get popular fiction through. Yeah, here. New media environments. So you get things like flash fiction, you get all these graphic novels and all that kind of stuff, comic books, like all that stuff is now coming in. So that's me droning on, my impromptu lecture. And so with that, if we go back to the question that I'm going to ask you to talk about, that question is, how does Butler's text fit in to your understanding of speculative fiction? And I'm going to stop recording and then let you all talk, and then we'll come back. And yeah, pause again. And now we are recording again. So these are our 2 questions with our dynamic panel we have today. 2-person expert. So let's go ahead and get started with question 1. What was your impression of Butler's text, Kindred, keeping in mind that it is a representative text of what speculative fiction?
Well, I can start. I think that, the impression I got was there's a thing going on social media right now that's saying like, whatever you're doing right now in the present moment is what you would be doing like in any of the historical times. Like they're saying, if it was the Civil War right now, you'd be doing what you're doing now. So I think that's something that's reflected in this. Like, what would Kevin and Dana be doing if they were actually implanted into the antebellum South, and then all of a sudden they're there? So that was really interesting to me.
So are you saying that the expectation is that you would be doing the same thing in the 20th century that you would?
Right. Like, I don't necessarily agree with that, because I just think you snap into gear in different moments, different times. But I guess the point is like in the acceleration of like the Civil War, people did what they were doing. So whatever you're doing right now, if you're like out protesting, or if you're out at home, or if you're not really focusing on it, or if you're talking about it with your family, like whatever you're doing now is like what you would have been doing then. So they are trying to like spread awareness to like keep that in your mind, I guess. So it's just interesting, like, what if I was suddenly like transported to one of these times like they are in the book?
I get it. So like if you will find a way to try to be the person you still are. You will, even within that, like even the restrictions that Dana had as being a woman and also being Black, and also like the burden of being educated, like she found a way to like still resist, because she wasn't really following the rules like in her time, right? Because her aunt and uncle wanted her to just get a regular job that would pay
right.
you. So she didn't follow the rules here in her time. So, but it was just, and I guess also what you are willing to put yourself in danger in order to still be true to yourself, because her physical danger increased. But oh my gosh, I'm sorry, my Apple Watch started to talk for no good reason. So yeah, I hadn't thought about that, because she did put herself in increasing amount of danger when, deciding to teach Nigel and I think it was Carrie to read.
Yeah, like she could have just totally 100% played the part, just did what she was told the whole time, just been scared to death, but she took a lot of risks, which was really interesting.
And that's, even though we don't get a lot of information about her life in 1976, and I guess it's because we're closer to it, she was a risk taker, even in like not finishing college and just going to be a writer. And and that's not something that would, and also the gender thing is important, because that's always a risk for a woman, even in the 70s, to say, I'm just going to be a writer. That's probably not the go-to job for a woman ever, maybe. Until maybe now, I don't know. Was that Claire? Because I don't know who's talking. I can't see.
Yeah, I thought that was interesting. That's not at all how I thought about the book when I looked at it, but that makes sense, like how people react to things, whether it was back then or now, kind of goes down to the core of that person.
Yeah, I mean, and that's one of the reasons we have these conversations, because like, wow, I didn't ever really think about that. And even what does it mean to be a woman risk taker in any time period? All right. So what's your take?
When I first read it, I just, like, it really just stood out to me more directly, like, how women were treated in general throughout the book.
Yeah. I forgot. Mrs. Whalen, is that her name? The mom?
Yeah, the guy's wife.
Yes. Rufus's mother.
Yes.
Margaret?
I felt
Yes, Margaret Whalen.
Yeah.
Yeah, I felt bad for her. And I felt bad that I felt bad for her, but her life seemed to, she had like no real purpose. Like even the slave women had more purpose than she did.
Yeah, and then even like knowing that her husband was sleeping around with the other like slaves or his mistresses, like she was just kind of chilling, letting it happen, not standing up for herself or doing anything.
You're nice to call them mistresses, because I'm pretty sure all those women would wish he would just leave them all alone.
Yeah.
But yeah, so she couldn't do anything about it. And it's not that it's just she couldn't, because remember she wasn't literate either. But I remember that point in the book that when Rufus says that when his first wife died, he made sure his second wife couldn't read.
Oh, I forgot about that.
Yeah, which is just absolutely terrible. Honestly, reading this book made me much more grateful for my current situation. It's just like a reminder how bad it was.
Yes, and the currency of reading and writing. We're not talking about educated. We're just talking about the actual value of being able to read.
Yeah.
At a high school level, and what that meant for women, and then what that meant for Black women. But it was, I understand now. The book helps you see like why that's so dangerous, because you can't really have power over people if they have a skill that you don't. Mm-hmm. Or if they have a skill that's equal to you. So, and it's also interesting just how it made me wonder, like, what was the literacy rate, just general, so we can assume that even the white population in, what was it, 1819, the 1800s, like, just people weren't reading and writing. It just wasn't a thing. But so we kind of just talked about our impressions of the text. But okay, what does it have you think about the characteristics of speculative fiction? It
kind of reminded me of speculative fiction when, like, well, she's in a different time. She goes back to it, but then the fact that she tries to, like, ignorantly see if she can change it almost, because she has, like, an impression on Rufus, and she figures out that that's, like, her, like, what, grandfather or something, or bloodline down the road, and she almost tries to make a difference in the past to affect her future. And I feel like that's kind of along a speculative line of things, especially after the little mini lecture you gave in the beginning there.
Yeah, it's a big what if, like, what if I can make him more humane?
Yeah.
But so it's kind of the argument over nature versus nurture, but even less so because she's not even around enough to give him much nurturing. She pops in and out. But so he's sort of consumed by his the world around him. So that is a good point of it, this whole, I'm not sure that when you were reading it, did you have any like hope that she would be able to influence him?
I had hope, but I kind of doubted it.
I did. I had hope.
Yeah. And her husband, Dana's husband, is like his character is like the reason, like, you can try, but do you not see this world that he lives in. And so I know when they get a little bit of their argument is a little bit about like, well, you can try, but I don't see how when he's such a part of this. This is society, so this is normal. And then something that one of you said earlier was, you know, you manage to figure out how to be yourself, but she had to give up a lot in order. But and let's remember the premise of this is, why does she have to keep him alive? No,
So that she can be alive.
yeah, and it means he's gonna do what though in order for her to be born?
Rape the woman.
This is horrible. So,
Yeah.
Bad side effects to his life for other people.
So yeah, and I'm gonna be the devil's advocate here. So devil advocate could say, well, you know, if you really want to change the world, then you wouldn't have this woman suffer this way, and you won't.
But then it kind of goes into like the speculative loop, kind of, because like if she stops him from raping that woman, then she wasn't ever born, then she can't go back in time to stop him. I don't know. It just kind of like gets fuzzy.
Yes. So that's all crazy, but it also is a little bit selfish too, because like I want to be born. And people are, it's okay, and it's people are selfish. So even if we're doing something good. So yeah, and it's a hard moral place to be in. So I guess I understand why she really tried to make him a better person. But a better person meant that he would have to, the lady that he forced himself on would have to want to be in a relationship with him. And she didn't have control over any of that. So I don't think too hard about that because it makes my head hurt. But yeah, so the other things, right? Does it deal with social issues? Does it make us feel uncomfortable? So any of that would push it into this sort of speculative fiction space. And does it have major and minor narratives going on?
Well, an uncomfortable thing that I spent a lot of time on in my critical essay was when Dana and Kevin went to 1815 together. It was interesting because the power dynamic in their relationship was really amplified, because in that time they were extremely not equals all of a sudden. So in 1976, they were able to achieve a normal life where they were striving to be equals, but in 1815 they just plainly were not. And so they had some run-ins where Kevin was a very privileged white person that does not have to fear for their life on the daily, and then Dana was a Black woman, so experiencing that intersectionality. And there are a lot of times where he didn't understand right away what her feelings were, so they had a lot of sticky moments surrounding that, which were uncomfortable but interesting.
Yeah, that's very good, and I applaud your use of that big old word.
Thanks.
But that's also and it also helps to understand, like, so she has to take time out in her survival in this time to try to explain stuff to him. Yeah. And that is something that's still reminiscent today. Like people who are marginalized, like I'm tired of trying to explain to people who are not, like, what this is like. So, and we actually get that in their relationship in the 1970s, because he asked her like I think she says 3 times, he asked me, would I type up his manuscript? And I'm like, and the first time she did it. And then the second time she said no. And he got mad at her. And the third time he told her like to leave his house. So to me, that's an example of what you're saying. Like she was trying to assert like, no, we are equal. Like, I don't want to do this. You don't want to do it. It's your writing. Why would I want to do it? But they had the space to see each other in, as full human beings and work through that. So yeah. There was that male-female dynamic in the 70s, but we had a space to work through it. And it was just the two of them, not the whole world sort of on his side saying, nope, she should be your secretary. So.
Right. And I feel like their time travel experience was well, maybe not necessary, but important, because for their relationship in 1976, I feel like with the manuscript example and like the book example, she just kind of like tells him those things aren't right, but brushes it off ultimately. Like she doesn't get into it with him and explain to him why that's offensive to her. But in 1815, they really have to face that, and he has to learn a lot, and then they get to carry it back.
Yes, that's really good, very great points. Who's talking? Because I can't see.
Claire.
That's Claire?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
It's hard to tell.
Yeah, the screen up here. All right, we only have like 13 minutes left. Kaylee, did you want to add anything before we move to the next question?
I was just gonna say that I did notice another way that it's speculative fiction is that there are the multiple little stories in it.
Yes, please do.
There's like the overall story of them moving and getting into their writing before they go back in time. But then each time they go back in time, it's like a different story because Rufus is a different age.
Mm-hmm.
And so I thought those were each different stories. And then in the past is a different story than their current, which is still our past, but
yeah,
multiple different stories and settings.
It seems like this requires much more reader attention. Speculative fictions require us to do more as readers. That's what I also feel like. You got to pay attention to all these things that are going on. And it's kind of, there's a little bit of mystery and suspense too, because every time she goes back, like, we don't know what's going on. We got to put pieces together to figure out what's happening next. All right, so then the last question, well, I also want to just point out that what happens to both of them physically, I think someone said this already, but this changed them in a way that when they came back, they could like they're different then. And especially for Kevin, actually, he's my other like favorite person. I really wish I could see more of his life when, he's trapped there for years. I just really like, if I could write a response to it, it'll be like Kevin's time while Dana was away. That's what I would like to see. But the physical, they both come back with right, social, emotional, like mental scars, but she comes back with physical scars. And I always found that interesting. She's got like whips on her back. She got one arm, so they take the same trip, but they don't have the same effects. And I don't know the answer to that, but that seemed to speak to thinking about what speculative fiction might force us to think about these what ifs in our own like social worlds. Considering the 3 genres that you've read, how has your understanding of pop lit changed? And then there is silence. Are you there?
Yes.
Oh, okay. I'm going to take it off the screen. I'm going to see people again. So. Don't worry, you don't even have a bunch of time for this. We only got 10 minutes, so.
Are we re-videoing?
Yes.
Okay.
No. I'm sorry. I meant I am still videotaping. I'm sorry, Claire, your face is on. Hi, everyone. That's Claire.
It's okay.
I'm sorry.
I wanted to say hi. Okay, so I think some of the takeaways I have for this question are really thinking about the formulas of the genres, especially like the clearest formula to me is the mystery crime genre. That one's really clear cut because you can see that they usually start with somebody who's going to be the person to solve the crime. There's a crime, there's an event, and then the crime always gets solved because nobody wants to read it if it doesn't get solved. So that's just kind of like a page turning thing. So I think that's why that genre is popular. What else?
And you can join in anytime, Kaylee. You don't have to just.
I was just gonna let her finish if she had another
Okay.
thought train.
That's okay. You can go. That was my first thought train. Something
Okay.
I don't know.
Okay. I was just thinking about, like, out of all the different genres we've read, how, like, much you can dig into the social issues behind them and how prevalent that was in each one, even though they're kind of different. I didn't realize, like, if you just, like, read it or watch a movie of the book, you can, like, miss over a lot of deep rooted stuff in them. And I think that might be part of what makes them so popular, especially during their time, is usually they're drawing on something that's happening at that time.
Yeah, it seems like, well, at least from the text that I gave you all, like this last one was very clear, and I think the first two we did was probably clearer because they were matched up against each other. You know, we read the short story and then you read the novella, and you know they're connected, so you can like see. Um, and then and Mosley. Oh, here's the other thing. That popular literature has changed over time to actually include many more voices who, by if that's going to be the characters in the text or even the people who are writing the these genres. So, and I just say in the text because in Mosley's text, because it's set in California, there's like a multicultural cast of people in his book. It wasn't just white people or black people. You had like Mexicans. There, you know, there was, and also they still talked about white Americans from like their groups. What do you call them? Ethnic groups. Italians. So it wasn't just like white people, and it wasn't just like black people. They had like their ethnic set. You remember that at all? Or am I making this up?
Yeah.
Okay. And that's cool because a lot of times we put people in such large categories that we have to remember that, you know, America is like a bunch of different people who have over time self-selected into these large groups, which is probably not the best way to engage with each other. That leads us to misconceptions and stereotypes and all that kind of jazz. But yeah, I agree. It helps us. Some of these may help you dig into social issues more than some other ones. Have either of you seen Jordan Peele's movie?
Get Out?
No, the other one. With the doppelgangers, the people who look like, us.
Oh, yes, I did see that.
Okay, so I have
Is that the one where they brain? No, actually, I think that's Get Out I'm thinking of.
Well, yeah, Get Out is about the interracial couple, but
The
no,
brainwashing?
yes.
Okay.
But Us is, I don't know what's going with that. Oh, so that's like that's an example of speculative fiction because it's an alternative universe. But it's set like in modern day times. You have this alternative universe, and it's and that's probably like and it has this, so it also has like this science fiction to it because they cloned people and then all this stuff happened. So these two lives living at the same time. And it reminds me of speculative fiction, what we're talking about now, like digging into social issues, like assuming that a group of people, whoever they are, they're not really human. They're okay because they were cloned. They don't feel it or think the same way until they do. So looking at I guess, has your understanding of it's deepened? Is it I would say, like, are you more accepting of like, hey, this is not easy to define? Because at the beginning of the semester as an instructor, I can tell you, like, people were like, just define this. I'm like, okay, they're gonna be upset with me as this semester goes on and it gets harder and harder to define. So I'm gonna stop our video there because I just wanted to capture some of that. And I agree that crime was easy. Horror is easy too, but speculative fiction kind of combines everything because it wants us to see perspectives and points of views. And while horror is meant to scare us, mystery is probably meant, and crime is meant to like intrigue us mentally, but speculative fiction is designed to make us question the world around us. And it's done that by actually having representing like more women, more people of color, more people are writing in this genre, and they're asking that question like, well, what if this happens, and what if, and they're not cumbered by, we got to explain all the science. So that's why it's not specifically science fiction, but it could be speculative crime, suspense, science fiction, all that together. I'm going to stop my share. Any closing or points you want to make? We have 2 minutes.
I think it's definitely made me find it harder, a little bit easier to define, but also realize how in depth it goes, and made me have to pay more attention when I read things. I'm like looking out for that kind of stuff now.
Cool.
Yeah, and before this class, I would have just defined popular fiction as books that are bestsellers and, you know, a lot of book sales, which it explicitly states in the Glover McCracken reading that that's not what it's about. So now I just have like a lot of different definitions that tie into what popular fiction is.
Yeah, and it's a lot more room for a lot more people and a lot more voices, so that's cool. All right, thank you. And I'm going